if someone does find that they have parasites, yeast, or worms in this DNA new school type of testing, what are some of the steps that you take to help resolve them, and how long does that process usually take?
Yeah, and so we can use various pharmaceuticals, we can use various botanicals, and we can use those even in combination or one or the other. And but the good news is that this is something that you treat and can go away. And so, a patient that I was working with, her diagnosis was ulcerative colitis. I said, based on some of the other things I'm seeing on your lab work, it looks like you had an infection when you went to the hospital and they told you ulcerative colitis. Let's do the stool test. Let's see what we see. And so we do it. There's an infection. We begin to treat it with different botanicals, compounds from garlic, compounds from things like golden seal and different berberines that are antimicrobial. We eradicate it, and her symptoms go away. And she says, well, do I have ulcerative colitis? Because that's what they told me I have. And they said I would have that forever. I'm like, well, that's a very interesting question. How about someone who had diabetes, but they got their blood sugar down and their insulin down? Do they still have diabetes? And so I think that the way we look at this is that she probably always will have a tendency towards a weaker gut, something that could get out of balance. But does she constantly cramp and bleed and have symptoms from this? No. And so sticking to care would say, we don't know what causes ulcerative colitis, and now you'll just take anti-inflammatories lifelong to manage that. Whereas we were able to see what was the cause of the ulcerative colitis. It was a bug that wasn't looked for, and they ran some cultures on her in the hospital, but just a handful, and they missed it. And so we run a bigger profile, we identify the cause, we treat it, and I like to talk about permanent remission.
I like that word, permanent remission. It is possible to put something into permanent remission. Absolutely. Especially if you're able to identify and search for the root issues of the problem. So important. So Dr. Burdett, you talked about some really great information that you can get aside from knowing whether there's bacteria, fungi, yeast, parasites in these stool tests, like overall immune health. So based on some of these additional markers that you can get and information you get from the stool test, why would you think someone or everyone could benefit from getting one of these on, say, a yearly basis as part of their annual wellness or yearly exam and testing?
Yeah, because not only can it be related to pathology, but the major thing that determines our rate of aging is, and if it were like a multiple choice now, and I said, is it cellular health and the mitochondria, the powerhouse that makes energy? Is it the cell membrane? I could see good rationalizations for picking those answers. But actually what they've tied to our aging, even more so than our own cells, is what is happening with the bacteria in our gut, that microbiome. And as that microbiome begins to decline, as we lose diversity, as the number of species are not as strong anymore, that's one of the major things that drives aging in our own system. These signals say, okay, we're wrapping up here. And another way to look at that is when they did studies and they looked at people from various areas, from Spain and Ireland and Portugal and the US, et cetera, the hypothesis of this study was that where you are from will dictate your bacteria. If I eat the same tomato you eat, there's the soil and the bacteria from that, and we'll have similar flora, we'll have a similar microbiome. And while that was true, where you were did help to determine similarity, it wasn't the thing that was most predictive. And the thing that was most predictive was your state of health. And so if I were frail and sickly and 18 years old, frail and sickly and 81 years old, our flora looked a lot alike. But if I were healthy and robust and 18 years old, but healthy and robust and 81 years old, those people's flora looked a lot alike. And so what they learned was, as your flora declines, as your microbiome declines, So do we. And so if we could look at this once a year, we'd have such an opportunity for prevention and wellness. Like Fasano's work taught us, what happens first is the leaky gut, then the onset of pathology. So if we could stop that in its tracks, we could stop pathology in its tracks. And that's exactly what he says. He says, if we remove the environmental trigger, we are no longer sitting around destined to have these conditions that our mom or our grandma had. If we can remove the environmental trigger, we can stop the assault to the cells so they don't express these genetics that result in various pathology.